Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our very special virtual conversation, What's Next? Preparing for a New Normal of Culture. I am James Wetzel, the producer of adult programs at the Museum of Science, and I am so thrilled to introduce this fantastic panel of voices tonight. For months now, Boston, like the rest of the world, has been essentially at a standstill due to the devastating effects of COVID-19. With no other way to slow the virus down, we had no choice but to self-isolate, forcing many industries and businesses to pivot, re-strategize, or even close their doors. Now, as we begin to think about transitioning out of isolation and reopen our city, our team began to wonder, what will the future landscape of Boston culture look like? When will travel and tourism resume? How can the Boston art scene be preserved? And will the dining industry ever be the same? Well, tonight we are so lucky to have with us an incredible panel of leaders from some of the cultural industries that make up our city. They will share their personal experiences as well as provide insight on how the arts, travel, and dining communities have been and will continue to be shaped by the pandemic, as well as what we as consumers, audiences, and business owners should be prepared for in this new normal. And tonight is a part of our virtual season of adult programming, which is a part of our MOS at Home initiative. We have turned the Museum of Science into a virtual museum, offering free STEM-related programming on a daily basis through our digital platforms. And as a part of that, we have launched our Subspace Adult Programs After Dark channel to host tonight's event, as well as the rest of our upcoming lineup. We have some incredible events still to come, still to even be announced. So I urge you to check out that full lineup and keep coming back to hang out with us after dark. Now, a little bit later on in the program, the panelists will have a chance to answer some of your questions. So as those come up, feel free to submit them as we go along through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen if you're watching with us through Zoom. And I just need to thank our friends from the Lowell Institute for their continued support of the adult programming at the Museum of Science. Without them, tonight would not be possible. We would not be here and it would not be free. So please join me in giving a huge virtual round of applause and thanks to the Lowell Institute. And finally, I ask if you enjoy the talk tonight, afterwards, if you can go to mos.org/Science Matters and show your support for MOS at Home and allow us to keep bringing programming like this into your homes. Once again, that's mos.org/Science Matters. But now it is my honor to introduce our moderator for the evening. He is such a dear friend to us at the museum, and we're so thrilled that he agreed to lead this conversation tonight. So please join me in welcoming into the Zoom science reporter and producer, Ari Daniel. Take it away, Ari.
Thanks so much, James, and good afternoon or evening to everyone. Thanks for joining us, as James said, for this program. I want to welcome you to this discussion of what's next, preparing for a new normal of culture. You know, as James said, for the last half a year or so, the world has kind of largely come to a stop as COVID-19, the coronavirus, has ricocheted from Wuhan to Washington. And as of a couple hours ago, we had 8.1 million total confirmed coronavirus cases globally, with almost 439,000 deaths worldwide. The only way to slow the virus down has been for us to isolate ourselves so that individuals and family clusters and industries were weathering the pandemic alone. And it's unclear when we're going to emerge out the other end of this thing. So here's the question that we're going to be addressing tonight. As we shape our lives in COVID times and eventually in post-COVID times, what should we be bracing ourselves for as we transition into a kind of new normal? And for those of you who didn't hear James's comments earlier and who are just joining us, you know, the questions that we're interested in talking about tonight are, you know, what might a meaningful economic recovery look like? When will travel be possible? And what is that travel going to be like? How can we restore the arts if they need restoration? Will the restaurant industry be changed, and how so? And how will the coronavirus impact who we are and how we express ourselves? Now, in a moment, I'm going to introduce our panelists, and as James explained later on after our panel discussion, we'll have time for you to ask your own questions. But first, I want to talk about some work out of Northwestern University. It's called Corona Data US, and it's a nationally representative survey that's collected daily of US public opinions and behaviors and attitudes that relate to the COVID-19 pandemic. The project is led by sociology professor Beth Redbird. Due to a last-minute personal matter, Dr. Redbird couldn't be with us today. But I wanted to take a couple minutes to briefly discuss the survey and summarize certain aspects of it, since I think it'll help inform our conversation with the panel. So the survey launched on March 11th. There's been no formal analysis yet, so they're mostly just kind of looking at general trends. You can look at these trends yourself and actually query the data if you want by going to coronadata.us. Since the survey is taken with 200 different people each day from urban areas and rural areas, it means that they can actually look at trends over time and that they can capture fast-moving changes. The survey asks respondents lots of questions like how they're feeling, whether they think the pandemic is a hoax, whether they think the crisis is fostering a sense of solidarity or community, and more. Now, I want to focus on one aspect that's come out of the work, and that is that people are as engaged emotionally with what's going on in the world with COVID-19 as when this all began. Many remain afraid, and it's changed, at least in the short term, the way that we interact with the people around us. So one finding is that in large part, the public isn't ready to return to normal life, or the life that we had before COVID-19, or at least not anytime soon. So they asked respondents, how comfortable would you be interacting with a stranger in your community? And generally, folks are still pretty uncomfortable. About 70% are very uncomfortable shaking hands with a stranger. 46% are very uncomfortable passing a stranger in the hallway. So they also asked the question of friends. How comfortable are you interacting with your friends? And the pattern was similar. Many people feel very uncomfortable shaking hands with a friend. They're a little more comfortable passing a friend on a sidewalk or in the hallway, but they wouldn't want to be in an elevator with a friend. The survey asked, how long will it take us until we're no longer worried about particular things? The majority of people think that it's going to take them longer than a couple months, or maybe never, before they're not worried about being in a crowd. The same is true of going to a movie theater, riding in a bus, riding on a plane. Now, obviously, these are large kind of public spaces, but they said the same about intimate spaces too, although the numbers were lower. About 20 or 30% of us say it's going to take more than a couple months before they're comfortable getting a haircut in the salon. 30 or 35% say more than a couple months before going to the hospital again. Now, one exception, a bright spot, is handling our mail. In general, we're not that worried about touching our mail. So this is a new normal that, based on this survey that Redbird and her colleagues are gathering, is showing that the effects of it are going to last a while. And the other thing that they found is that if you've experienced the pandemic personally, if you know somebody, a neighbor, a friend, a colleague, a family member who's gotten COVID-19 and gotten really sick, or maybe even died, that you're way more likely to view the pandemic as not a hoax. You're way more likely to worry about it, to engage in social distancing and be concerned about it. And as the coronavirus continues to spread and move through our communities, more and more people are going to be experiencing it personally. So what does all this mean to be in terms of our sense of being part of a community during a time when we've isolated ourselves for the good of our community, for the good of our neighbors? How do you reach out to people when you can't be with them in person? In other words, how do we remain interconnected? And that brings us to our panel. So to help answer these questions, I want to welcome all of our panelists to our virtual floor here. So each of you can go ahead and turn on your video. Please continue to leave your audio muted for the time being. And I'm going to introduce each one of our panelists and ask them the same question to start things off. And then I'll facilitate group discussion after everyone's had a chance to respond. And then we'll leave time at the end for your questions, which you can enter into that Q&A box at the bottom. So we're going to start with Martha Sheridan. She is president and CEO of the Greater Boston Convention and Visitors Bureau. Martha has over 25 years of experience in destination marketing. She's the chair of the Massachusetts Advisory Commission on Travel and Tourism, which is made up of 30 representatives from public and private organizations involved in travel, tourism, and hospitality. In 2015, Martha was named one of the top 25 women in the meetings industry by Meetings and Convention magazine. She loves travel, which is suitable for her line of work, and spending time near and on the water. So Martha, to kick things off, let me ask you this opening question, which is, what has the experience been like for you individually and for the travel industry during the pandemic?
Well, I've been in my job for about a year and a half now in Boston, and was really, really ramping up prior to the pandemic really taking hold in March. So it felt like I went from 90 to 0 pretty quickly, and then now I've ramped back up to 90 with recovery and just working on communications issues around the virus. But for me personally, it's just been a challenge. I'm an extrovert. I mean, I'm in the hospitality industry for a reason. It's because I love to be around people, and I know that's such a cliche, but it's really what drew me to the industry in the first place. It's all I've ever done, and so you know, I'm at home. I have a place in Rhode Island and an apartment in Boston, so I've been spending most of my time in Rhode Island, and you know, spending time with family, which has been really great, reconnecting with my grown children. So that's been a real positive. But, you know, for me, it has been very difficult to not be in the presence of other humans all this time. But that being said, you know, I have my marching orders right now, and it's not really about me. It's about this industry that is one of the 5 largest in the Commonwealth, and it's been completely devastated by the crisis. So some would say that, and many say, that nationally the negative impact on the travel industry from COVID-19 is going to be 9 times greater than the after effects of 9/11. So if you can remember back to those days, you can see how this is going to be a very long and slow recovery for us. And you know, the impact has been profound on every single aspect of the travel industry, and I think we will be the last to recover, including, you know, the ability to physically visit the Museum of Science again in the future and partake in those activities hands-on and in person. You know, first and foremost, our hotels, many of them are closed. We've got about 60% of our hotels closed right now, and they were only taking essential workers for a very long time. And just to give you perspective, a year ago at this time, our hotel occupancy would have been in the 80s, the low 80s, and now it's anywhere between 10 and 20% with only half the capacity reporting in. So obviously, we've got a huge workforce out of work, and that's been a real challenge. And these are people that I know, friends, and you know, people that have become my extended family. So that's been difficult. We've got a couple of great restaurateurs on the call, but I think it's very clear that that industry has been ravaged as well. And you know, while a lot of hotels have a corporate backup, so to speak, and funding from a larger entity to keep them afloat, you know, obviously that's not the case with a lot of our chef-owned restaurants and smaller restaurants, and even just those small restaurant groups in Boston. So that's been a challenge. The good news is both hotels and restaurants at least have made incremental progress in reopening, in that outdoor dining is allowed right now in restaurants. We're hoping for indoor dining soon. And then hotels now can take guests beyond essential employees, although we do still have a quarantine recommendation, quote unquote, in place. So we're not going to be as robust in hosting visitors just yet. Hopefully that'll be lifted soon. And then, of course, as I stated, beyond that, all of our tours, all of our attractions are shuttered. I communicate regularly with members of all of those communities, including the arts community. If you talk to folks in the arts community, they don't see themselves hosting performances until at least the first of the year. So I don't think we're going to have those, unfortunately, those in-person experiences anytime soon. I do think we'll see some tours, a lot of outdoor activities. We may see museums open with very limited capacities, which will change the overall experience. But, you know, in general, we have a long road ahead of us. So first part of the pandemic, I spent all of my time gathering information and really becoming a conduit to our partners and providing them with the resources that they needed to access recovery funds, CARES Act information, data around the virus, protocols being put in place, et cetera. And that's been very, very, for me, very transformational, because I've been able to talk with a huge subsection of our members, large and small. And while I've focused oftentimes on our larger partners, this has allowed me to really listen to and hear what a small business owner is suffering from. And now we're moving into a recovery mode, which is a great thing. And, you know, we are up for the challenge. We were very sensitive to when we should start this process, but I think the time is right. So we have developed a video that we hope gives people a nostalgic feeling for what Boston was and will be again. And if we want to run that video, I'll just wrap up by talking a little bit about what next steps we'll be taking in that process.
Coming back to Boston, so many places, we met a lot of people, seen some beauty, but nothing ever equals home. Oh, yes, we go away, but we never stay away from home. Oh, yes, we do. Oh, we're coming home.
So the goal there is to get people to start thinking about coming back to Boston and experiencing it the way it was. We know we still have a long way to go for that to happen, but you know, we're starting to deploy other plans as well. And our goal will be to focus on concentric circles of a marketing strategy, focusing first on Massachusetts residents, getting them around the state to other parts of the state, and then moving those circles out as time permits. And ultimately, you know, we have to think about the hardest part of the conversion, which will be large scale meetings and conventions, which are a huge part of our business, and the international visitor.
Thank you, Martha. Got a bunch of questions we'll come back to in a little bit. Next up is Edrie. Edrie was raised on a farm in North Dakota. She never thought her Lawrence Welk accordion skills would come in handy, but now from heifers to the hallowed halls of Harvard, nice alliteration, Edrie, and everywhere in between, Edrie accordions, arts, parents, sciences, makes connections, and manages projects of all sorts while rocking out with her band Walter Sickert and the Army of Broken Toys. Fun fact, she was recently featured in the Italian Vanity Fair as part of a photo series called The Redhead Project. Let me ask you, Edrie, what has the experience been like for you and the art world during the pandemic?
Well, it's certainly been interesting. You talked earlier about pivoting, and I think that for us and how we experience, so my band is a very large band. There's 8 people in it. We have been nominated for Live Band of the Year several times for the Boston Music Awards, and Live Band of the Year means live, in person, large scale shows of all sorts, and those things are just not happening. Friday, March 13th was sort of the pinnacle of when things changed for us. We, got the call from our daycare that daycare was shutting down that day, and got the call from a couple of venues that we were going to put things on pause for a while for some big shows we had for the summer, just to see how things were. And within 48 hours, pretty much our entire outward in-person artistic life was canceled, along with all of the income that we would make from that, which is how we live as artists. So it was very personal. It really was, you know, this is a thing we do for love, a thing we do for money, and a thing we do to be with other people. And all of those things sort of compressed and compiled on each other and stopped being viable, at least for a term that we, you know, were uncertain of then and even are uncertain of now. Like I talked to venues, and we do have shows booked for 2021. Will those happen? Hopefully they will happen. Hopefully they can happen in a way that harkens back to how we experienced live shows previously. But, you know, the future is really uncertain. So you talked about pivoting. We've pivoted. And a lot of artists are doing this. We attend lots of online shows. I think at most any hour of the day, you can go on to any of the streaming platforms and see art being created. And hopefully that art is also not just fulfilling for the artists and the people watching, but also helping monetarily as well, because it is, you know, arts and culture is a big industry, and I think one that is much overlooked when we're talking about return on investment. And, you know, Boston being a hub for tech, Boston is also a hub for arts and culture. And so keeping that going, I think, is really important for us. So we pivoted. We've been renewing partnerships we had previously. So we worked with the Museum of Science. We had been throwing a yearly show in the planetarium, which was very interactive. The band was live. We had live projections to live music with, you know, people filling the planetarium. And the Museum of Science programmed something similar to that online, so we could partner with them and present a feeling of what that is like, but online for people to sort of enjoy for free. And then adding new partnerships. So work with Manifest Boston, who had a Manifest at Home series, bringing sort of a songwriting salon. So we can't get the whole band together. Many of us are, so I'm immune compromised, so we're being really, really careful with who is in our bubble. And so far it's just our tiny little family. But through Manifest Boston, we were able to sort of get together and show people how we could do songwriting with each other while we were apart. Normally we would get into a tiny studio space and feed off each other and sort of play. And, you know, the direct connection wasn't there, but we're able to sort of get on Zoom and do those kinds of things. And we're, through Manifest Boston, able to show that. Doing live streams, like we partnered with Above the Basement to do a live stream that was a show in our house. And we tried to make it feel like one of our shows, even though it was just my partner and I. But we, you know, we set the stage, we put up props, we had good lighting, we did the best we could with sound. Zoom and sound sometimes don't play well together. So you know, as artists, musicians, and visual performers, you're thinking about technical things that you didn't have to think about before. But we, you know, we get around those things. We invite people in, we partner with people. And my partner and I have been doing a daily dystopian talk show to just sort of connect with people. It's streamed on Facebook Live, 9 p.m. on weekdays and 4 p.m. on the weekends. And the 4 p.m. on the weekend slot includes our daughter if she wants to come. She's 5. And sometimes she wants to, and sometimes she doesn't. And that's just a way for us to connect to our friends and our audience and our fans, and to make new connections, and something that we can personally look forward to and have an artistic outlet for. So that's been really fun. So I put together a little video that shows the various things that we've done over these 90 days with the partnerships. And I think we can run that now, and then I'll just wrap up before the next one. So.
Secrets discovered, rise up from death.
that highlights a few of the partnerships that we've done and some of the performances that we've done digitally now that we're a fully embraced digital artistic medium. And hopefully it gives a sense for what live shows were like and gives an immediacy for people so that they can still experience art. So that's sort of what has been happening for me personally as an artist during this pandemic.
Thank you, Edrie. Thank you for sharing that clip. I'd like to turn to Ellie Tiglao next. Ellie first came to Boston about 10 years ago to pursue a career in research, but soon found herself in the arts, pushing forward the idea of food as a medium that encourages connection and conversation. The pop-up she began in 2014 bloomed into a cooperatively owned restaurant called Tanám, which stands on a foundation of racial equality and labor justice, and offers a platform for POC storytellers to tell stories that are all at once political, cultural, historical, and personal. Ellie, tell me, what have things been like for you and the dining world during the pandemic?
Yeah, hey, thanks. So I think one thing about what's happening right now for us at Tanám, I think Tanám is kind of a different sort of place when you think about dining, because we sort of sit at this intersection of food and beverage, community organizing, and arts. And so some of the things that we've been, really the big question that we've been kind of dealing with is how to balance thinking about that need to make sure we survive, just really thinking about the numbers and making sure we don't throw our mission out the window because we're in this kind of emergency right now. And this pandemic has given us a real opportunity to regroup and really reconsider where we are as an organization. There's lots of different things that we do at Tanám. For folks who don't know, we're really tiny. We have a 10-seat table that's communal. You're often sitting with strangers. You are coming into the situation where you might not know the menu or the story, but you're trusting us to provide you with an experience that's going to be memorable. And so people who are on the call will probably understand that we're probably grappling with a lot right now, because being in a space together is kind of it's not where people want to be right this second. So if possible, I'd like to go to the next slide, please. While we've been in the past year more focused on food and beverages, there are really two aspects that we've found to be things we really want to focus on at this time and as we move forward, and that's our community work and how we think about the arts. So this next slide that just came up is a slide that shows Tunde Wei, who's a Nigerian born chef who's based in New Orleans. And we have really been thinking about like how to use this moment to really create a new normal and be part of making something that's not going to turn into what we've seen during this time. So this quote comes from a conversation Tunde Wei had with a writer. Her name's Helen Rosner. And one thing that he talks about that I think really illustrates like where we are at as a cooperative is just how restaurant owners have been really thinking about how to save our industry as a whole. And Helen Rosner had mentioned a restaurant critic named Dara Moskowitz-Grumdahl, who wrote that restaurants right now are really the closest thing the United States has to a social safety net. And for anyone who's ever been in a restaurant, you know that's kind of a poor alternative to a real social safety net. And so I just kind of want to read something that he shared. He said in this interview with her, which is that the only true affirmative and sustainable response is a governmental response, one that's universal, that's agnostic of industries, at least initially, and that focuses on developing a really robust social safety net, so we don't have to rely on unfortunate fake safety nets like poor restaurant jobs. And I think that's where we're also at. So we're kind of moving in that sort of, we're moving in our community work with that sort of lens, really taking into account also that we're not only in the middle of a pandemic that is about our health, but also about racial equity. A lot of, I'm sure many people on this call are aware of what's happened in this country with the unrest after what happened with George Floyd, and that's definitely top of mind for us. Next slide, please. The other piece that we're really thinking about is how we're engaging in the arts locally and kind of more broadly. We see kind of holding up examples that we have seen really doing the work over the past couple of years as part of our work. So we've been part of this project called the Boston Ujima Project since its inception. Ujima means collective work and responsibility. It's really a project that's trying to create a community-controlled economy. One aspect of what they do is something called Black Trust, which is a arts and lecture series named after the late Chuck Turner, who was an activist and politician in our local Boston scene. And we see supporting things like that as something that's really important to us. There's also been some really interesting sorts of ways that artists have been pivoting that have been really not just, I think, like really good, innovative ways of thinking about the platforms we're using now. So, for example, I actually just participated in this past weekend. There's something called Eschaton, which is basically a virtual nightclub where you have an hour to navigate through rooms full of performers who you can choose to interact with or not. And you can also solve a puzzle while this is all going on. So I think what they're doing is really interesting. There's also a local collaborative called Moon Eaters that is bringing together art makers of all sorts to make art collaboratively, virtually. So I think kind of looking at to these examples that have already existed and that are being put together now that we're in this moment are things that we're interested in. Next slide, please. And yeah, so just kind of to end it, I'm personally doing all right. I think a lot of people in my industry are really anxious, especially thinking about like taking care of their workers. A lot of people haven't been able to access unemployment, for example. And so a lot of restaurant owners are trying to think of all of the different ways they can support their workers. I'm really lucky to be part of a worker owner team and to make these decisions together as a collective. And I am just looking forward to being able to enact the sorts of planning that we've been doing over this time once this pandemic is over. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ellie. I'd like to bring up our final panelist. This is Douglas Williams. Douglas is cooking with his own team in his first restaurant, MIDA, in Boston, and working on a second project, a pizza to open in the new Hub Hall in North Station in Boston. Douglas earned his culinary arts degree and then traveled the world, learning from the best. And when he came to Boston, all he saw here was opportunity for change and the chance to create something really meaningful. And now with MIDA, he has a neighborhood restaurant that's inspired by the kind of classic Italian culinary traditions. He puts his passion for storytelling and teaching to use by building bridges in the community through food and conversation. He told me that his kids are everything to him. He's got twin boys that are almost 2.5. Douglas, tell me, we just heard from Ellie about her perspective on what the dining world has been like during the pandemic. Tell me about your perspective on that and what it's been like for you.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. And I'm glad to see everybody trying to come collectively in the same topic. And, I think I'll start out by saying a lot of what we have done before is what we're doing now. A lot of the outreach, obviously a ton of generosity. MIDA in Italian is actually two words. It means he gives me or she gives me. And we translated that to generosity. And that is the pillar that everything stands on with the restaurant, from the way we price food, from the portion sizes to how we train, to how we hire. And that is something that we can't lose, no matter if there's a pandemic, a tsunami. It's always going to be, those processes are always going to resonate with any program that we set up, whether it be a fundraiser, or we're focusing on a local charity, or we're just trying to put a dish out for the weekend. It's all very relatable. And right now, it's tough because we're going through obviously a hard time. Everyone is going through a hard time, so it's especially difficult to boast yourself up and say, this is what we're doing, and this is how we're succeeding, and this is how we're making it through, and this is who we're helping, without coming off as braggadocious. And I'm finding it's not a hard thing to do, but it's we have to constantly change our message depending on the severity, week to week, because I think we're all living week to week right now, even though we're thinking months ahead. And once we think of the fall time, we just like, we have to bring ourselves back to a reality and say we can't go there yet, whether it be a wedding or an event that we were looking forward to pre-COVID. So we have to constantly have this lather of reality that we have to hit ourselves with almost on a daily basis, but even maybe more than once a day. And it's very it puts you back in your seat. It makes you maybe focus on the people that aren't as fortunate as you, whether it be personal or industry wise. And I think that it's interesting because even with the pandemic happening now, as we're starting to ease and go back to get back on the highway of normalcy, but still pay a toll, it seems like every single day, and kind of remind ourselves, we still have the other demic, if you will. We have our epidemic, our opioid epidemic, that if anybody in Boston who drives down Mass Ave, gets on 93, or jumps on the 90, or shoots over to East Boston or South Boston, we all see and feel and also relate directly to this opioid epidemic that is happening simultaneously, that still needs attention, that still needs solutions, that still needs help, that still needs all of our energy. And that's, maybe a silver lining with some of the opening. It's not even about, when are we going to open up? When are we going to have more capacity? When are we going to, that is very much not on my mind at all. The safety of the employees, trying to make sure that we don't, we leave our doors open, so some people will just walk in and we say, no, you have to stay outside. And it's a very awful thing. We never want to push people back out. We never want to ever. It's never been a thing of ours. So it's very odd, and it's going against a natural response. So that's more the focus, is just keeping our employees and our staff safe, and shifting our other focus, our helping hand, to what's going on directly around us of people obviously in a lot of pain, a lot of suffering. And the thing is, we can't see COVID. We can see the effects, but it's really hard to see COVID right in our face. And I think the opioid epidemic is always going to keep itself present until we start to really dig our heels in and get very, very serious about it. So there's also another silver lining that allows us to now maybe focus on other things, like our charities that we love, our foundations, Crohn's and Colitis Foundation, Stepping Stone Foundation, all the things that we were fundraising for, supporting, going to galas, going to fetes, and enjoying that communal solidarity of helping the things that we care about, has seemed to take a 3-month hiatus, and now we're doing it on video calls. But now we need to get back to it and figure out how we can not just fundraise through Zoom, and not just fundraise through at a distance, but how can we do it safely in a more personal way, and in a way that shows some progression in how we're going to be taking on this new normal, because it's probably not going to go away for quite a while, as we know, and they'll just, as we were saying earlier about the about 9/11, how that shifted our thoughts and how we went through our days. It's going to be the same way now. It's just going to probably be, maybe even be a little longer, and we are just trying to make sure we help others before we help ourselves, whether it be artists, whether it be foundations, whether it be the people who are hurting right outside of our doors. That's it. We can't help but focus on that, because you focus on what's in front of you, and that is what's there. So that's what we're, both excited and nervous about embarking on, but that's the responsibility that we take as restaurant owners, but also people who represent a community and a neighborhood and a city. So
thank you, Douglas. I want to now open this up to a kind of a group conversation, and I just want to remind folks that you can pop your own question in that Q&A box down at the bottom, which I'll turn to a little bit later in our conversation. And I also encourage the panelists to respond to one another, and if something comes up where you've got a question or a follow-up, to please just pipe up, and this is a group discussion. I want to start by talking about, Ellie and Douglas, your work kind of focuses specifically around kind of building, community, and Ellie, talking about kind of narrative and story. But, I'm wondering kind of more broadly, the role that you all see and how you can kind of play a role. I mean, part of what COVID-19 has done is it's fractured our ability to be together and pulled us into smaller chambers. What role do you see you and your industries having in helping to provide a kind of way to bridge those gaps, and to find a way to, even if it's not healing people in a hospital, find a way of social healing?
Ellie, did you want to go first?
Sure. So one way that I see restaurants in general being able to do this is that restaurants are full of professionals whose job it is to make sure that people enjoy themselves in a safe way. And so it's a very simple thing, but I think restaurants allow people to come into a place where they know that they're going to be taken care of, and that they know that the people who are there are professionals who know all of the ways to make sure that people can be together safely. And so on that very basic level, I think that's a way that I can see our role right now.
Douglas, you're muted.
Thank you. I agree with Ellie wholeheartedly. That's the most basic impulse, is to have someone in, and everything goes from there, right? When the restaurant's empty, it's closing. It's about the processes in the back, and food preparation, organization, and cleanliness, and all the things that we kind of hold as a restaurant. We're a team, and then once the doors open, we're a production. And I'm sure with the arts, as everyone was saying before, even with the band perspective, is that if the room is empty, it's just you, and the walls can't hear you, and they don't judge, and I honestly kind of miss the judgment. I miss the criticism, the finger pointing, I like the tools that humans use when you dine, and when you are entertaining each other. That is a thing that I think I miss the most. That connection when people are walking, to use the restroom or to just get some air, and they walk by the kitchen and they want to stop and chat, and they know you can't, and they still do it anyway. And they I know you're busy, but I just want to tell you this, and or I'll be back next week, or I'm bringing this person. They can't wait to share, small pieces of their life with you. And that's the window that you get of each individual guest. You get, you know, what they did last week or where they just got back from. They tell you a little about their travel, and then you find out something about their kids, and then they call over their friend that's super shy, and they say this and this and that. And it's just that's what I look forward to. And I would think Ellie does as well, that a restaurant professional just looks forward to basically host. You get to throw a party 362 days a week. That is an incredible, and you have to clean up before and after every single one of those parties. It's an incredible thing and a feat to do, all while keeping everybody healthy, all while, you know, maintaining a food and dining standard and hospitality standard. And that, above all, I'd rather that than being able, necessarily for me to go out. I'd rather maybe if we made some safe restaurants that were cleared, maybe, you know, 50 restaurants in the city, and then they clear another 50. And then as they get open, everyone's under the same protocol. But just some way to, you know, bring back that feeling. But that's, you know, that's going to take time, and that's okay. But that's what I miss the most, and what I want to get back to. But I also want to make sure that those processes are in place, because the worst thing I think right now in our thoughts is to go back to any sort of shelter in place. And this is, you know, I like to call it flexible sheltered right now. I think we're in. We have to stay in during certain hours and be very rigid with how we interact with each other during that time. We're in a place, a physical place, but now we get to have some flexibility. And that helps us to start to branch out and touch other things slowly and responsibly. And, you know, that's what I'm looking forward to.
So I just want to riff off of what, you know, both Ellie and Douglas are saying. And I think that this crisis will ultimately transform the tourism industry in the city of Boston for many years to come, because I think it's an industry that, from my initial observations as I started a year and a half ago, that was pretty much taken for granted. I think it was a destination that focused way too heavily on mass tourism attractions versus the nuances of the destination. And that's actually, when I first started, what I really wanted to pivot off of is Freedom Trail is fantastic. Don't get me wrong, love it. But you know, a Saturday afternoon on the Freedom Trail is really no fun. So why can't we get those visitors to go to Jamaica Plain and have an experience there? And initially, we're going to have to focus on outdoor experiences to bring visitors back to the city. So it really allows us as sort of destination product managers to get more creative in how we're packaging and presenting our assets. And it also allows the visitor who's not going to be comfortable coming into big city, crowded city areas. I know that from the research we're seeing. So we have to convince them that going to outdoor spaces that are less traveled in Boston is the way we're going to move forward, or going to these smaller restaurants like Ellie's and Douglas's with that intimate experience is going to make them feel more comfortable, because they know these guys have been really hands-on. Not that the bigger guys aren't going to do a fabulous job, because they really are, but I think these smaller venues are going to play to the kind of safety and security concerns of the traveler right now. And I think conversely, I'll finish with the fact that I really think, and I'm a traveler, I'm an avid traveler, and I love meeting people in this industry when I travel. And I think there's just going to be this newfound appreciation for our servers, for our hotel workers, for our artists that are, you know, performing to make us happy and create our experiences, for our tour guides. And I really feel like that the traveling public is going to come back to Boston and embrace us with open arms, not literally, but at least figuratively. And I think that's just going to lead us into a whole new direction for the tourism industry.
Edrie, I wanted to ask you about just sort of following up on, you know, Douglas's point about having an audience in a restaurant. And I love that. I mean, I'm a patron of a restaurant. I never really thought of myself as an audience member, but of course you've got an audience at every meal coming in, and partaking of what you're doing and hopefully applauding. But I'll know that you appreciate the feedback too. That's good. So Edrie, I'm curious, from your perspective of being an artist where you're probably used to the kind of real-time feedback of an audience, knowing how, like I was watching us while we were watching your video, a couple people were kind of nodding their heads and stuff. So, with that absence where you're kind of performing on your own, I'm wondering if you can talk to me about some of the trade-offs, because I know you've also said that this has given you a kind of additional opportunities, so there's been some benefits to kind of go into this new mode. So can you kind of talk to me about that, the trade-offs in terms of adding connection and missing connection?
Sure, yeah, it's really interesting. Our style of artistry is definitely forward and live and sort of big and very interactive. We go into the crowd, we we have a loose idea of what the show should look like, but we base what we're going to do off of feedback as it's happening. So we've completely pivoted how we present ourselves artistically because of that lack of feedback. And we do have some capacity to have that sort of real-time feedback. Especially with things like Facebook Live, where if you can manage it technology-wise, you can get immediate feedback from the people who are watching you through the, not body language, but certainly the form of them typing out things that they think that you need to know about how you are doing, which is great. But for us, we really, and for me especially, I really focus on the visual and sort of try and put myself in the sort of mind of the person who might be watching me and think about, is this something that I would personally sit and watch? When you're talking about now thousands of live streams at any point in time, it's an opportunity. So for me, I loved going to 2 or 3 shows a night if I could manage it, but often you can't do that physically, but now I can turn into 2, 3, 4 live streams a night. But how do you sort of capture that excitement and that audience so that they stay on your live stream? And that's putting yourself in the mind of the viewer and how they are experiencing what you're giving. And for us, we just want to be sort of a happy, interesting sort of place where people can just kind of forget about the difficulties that are happening and bring as many people together as possible and be as equitable as possible. So one of the things that we have struggled with as artists in Boston specific is, there are few venues, especially large scale venues for independent artists like us. Some of those, we have to charge a certain amount of money to be able to put on shows at larger venues. And now with the flattening of this and more people having access to technology, we can put on, even if the shows aren't large scale with lighting and lots of crew and in a theater, we can still put on really interesting things and reach more people more of the time. So I think that trade-off is, the lack of immediacy is a trade-off for the greater reach and the possibility of having people, collaborate with you on things that are, not in your immediate area. So we've been collaborating with people who are in the UK, and we had hoped to bring some of these people over to us, but that takes money, previous to the pandemic. But now we can do this on a Zoom call where we are, interacting with them online, and that is free and open to the public. And we don't have the cost of trying to bring that person over from the UK. We can do this digitally, and we can present it digitally. So I think the trade-off is one of opportunity, in that you don't necessarily have that immediate feed back from people who are physically standing in the same space that you're presenting in, but you do have that opportunity to sort of expand your horizons and be more equitable and not be a barrier to cost. Boston is hard for artists to live in. It's a very expensive city, has a lot of turnover, it has high rents. and this sort of flattens the field for us and allows us to reach more people more of the time. So I think that's where the opportunity lies in this. And I don't think that's going to go away. I truly feel like as live shows come on, you know, it's going to be difficult to put them on, especially, you know, the first sort of nervous energy about, you know, how can we get together in a space and all experience art in the same way. I don't think we'll experience in the same way for a long time. But I also don't think that this sort of new revolution of digital art will go away completely. I think it'll become, you know, an enrichment area for, you know, join us an hour before the show for this live stream of how we're going to set this up, and join us after the show for a Q&A. You know, those kinds of things I think will be now par for the course.
Thanks, Edrie. I want to start folding in some of the questions from the audience. This is for everyone, but Martha, maybe you can lead off on this one. It's questions from Tim Alevsky, and he writes, culture, and this sort of comes off of what you were just saying, Edrie. Cultural and artistic creation have always been stifled in Boston by the high price of living, combined with limited number of venues because of early closing times and restricted numbers of liquor licenses, he says. Are we just trying to return to the status quo, or how do we build more equitable availability of good food, arts, and culture in a time of extreme challenge for these sectors?
So I think, having spent a lot of time on Zoom calls with representatives from the community and the mayor's office, that the collision of both of these unfortunate events, meaning the COVID crisis and the George Floyd murder, have created a very unique synergy for shifting the paradigm in Boston finally. I really feel like there's a will, and hopefully there will be a way to bring more businesses that are owned by the Black and Brown community, but also just less focused on, into the forefront. And I've seen specific mention of the cost of liquor licenses actually being a barrier to success recently. So, and I think that the mayor's office, through their implementing these reopening protocols, and I heard it on a call today, has been very mindful of businesses that are in you know, less dense areas of the city and less, you know, popular visitor areas of the city, bringing to them the same I would say lifting of restrictions that they did to the popular areas, the North End, Newbury Street. So, you know, allowing restaurants from throughout the entire city the ability to have outdoor dining, and really moving the approvals process along for that. And I think it's probably, and I can't speak for the city, but I think this has definitely shown them that perhaps some of the onerous requirements and restrictions that have always been in place for businesses didn't need to be quite as onerous or expensive, and that I think there's going to be a new way of doing business as we move forward that will definitely, I think, lead to a much more equitable system and a much more unique and diverse offering of small business assets for the visitor and residents alike.
Thanks, Martha. Anyone else want to chime in on that one? I should also mention that it wasn't Tim Alevsky, it was Mrs. Susan Alevsky. She corrected me afterwards, who asked that question.
Would you mind summarizing the question that was just asked? And I can just
so the question is, Douglas, are we trying to just return to the status quo, or how do we think about building more equitable availability for socially kinds of offerings that you make? Yeah, exactly.
Okay. You know, I wanted to jump off of Mary's thing about the liquor licenses and you know, licensing in general. You know, there's a lot to what's happening right now, and I do my best to accept the employees that come in, as long as their experience can get the job done and help. And if they can't do the job, then we can teach them how to do the job. And as long as that is what still counts. And as long as that's what I'll allow anybody into my restaurant as an employee. As long as there's an ambition and drive and desire, or sometimes you need to show certain people desire and what that looks like, because they've either never seen it or they don't quite know how it fits with their personality. So that's something very awesome that I get to inspire and guide my employees on. But also, as we return to this, to answer your question, are people that either are underserved or want to now make a difference because they've seen what's happening, will they reach out? Will they walk through my door and say, I want to do this, or I want to be a businessman, not just be a chef and not just be a cook, because that's one very, fine route as far as career is concerned. And I think there's so much more out there. So I hope that I am approached by people who maybe haven't had or who haven't thought they had a shot before, or a certain lane into an industry, especially the hospitality industry, because it is so vast and it is so diverse as far as jobs and opportunities, and takes you all over the world. I mean, and if you can cook, you can probably stay at any welcome household on the face of this earth, as long as you're hospitable and you're kind and you show a level of empathy. And I think that's why hospitality is so great. It may not be always the most monetarily generous, but it is definitely made for your soul, and it is about giving pleasure to others, and especially strangers. So I hope that I see people who did not see themselves as a hospitality professional. Maybe they see me on this call, or maybe they see some piece of press, and they're inspired that way. So I hope we don't return to the new normal. But that's also, not all of it is based on just the industry itself. There is a lot of onus on us, but it also has to do with the public and people that want to make the change. They have to step up to the plate as well, meet in the middle, in my opinion.
Thanks, Douglas. A couple questions around kind of the economics of, Ellie, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a small thing. I think Tanám has been part of community organizing for a long time. And I think one thing that's really clear to us is that in order to get to a sustainable solution, we need to listen to the people who've been systemically left out and hear them on what they think the solutions are. And so I think for us as people who have power and privilege, it's not enough to maybe just leave the door open for comment, but to also go out of our way to spaces where those who have been systemically left out feel safest, and do that work of making sure that we're talking to people continuously, even if we're not getting an answer right away, even if the timelines that we're seeing don't fit conveniently with the way that our timelines are.
Thank you for that. I wanted to ask about kind of economic stuff. A couple people had questions. Jacob Segrins is wondering whether performing arts organizations can survive another season with potentially no in-person events. Will they be able to sustain donor interest? And AW has asked, what happens if everyone decides it's not economically feasible to return to live events or live outings, like going to restaurants or other types of things in the real world? Based on the data from Dr. Redbird, I don't think that's, that's unrealistic to think that people may have kind of a long period where they're wary of participating in these types of things. So what do you guys think of that, and sort of the economic realities associated with that?
Well, I can speak a little bit to some of the aspects of that. So I'm on the board of Once Somerville. It's a locally owned, medium-sized venue that puts on all sorts of events. And, it's very tough. The rent alone on that space is astronomical, and being closed even for just a few days with the razor-thin margins that a lot of arts organizations and venues have, it makes reopening really difficult. So, they're in much of the same boat that individual artists are, figuring out what, you know, economic feasibility looks like for them in an opening, especially when the phases come out and the different pieces of regulation that you have to abide by to open your venue related to those phases. So if you can imagine a place like a theater running at 40% capacity, I know from our experience that if we only had 40% capacity at a show, we wouldn't be able to put on most of the shows that we do because we wouldn't break even money-wise. So forcing 40% capacity as par for the course, I think, is very difficult for venues to stay afloat. And, you know, arts organizations who sponsor these kinds of shows would also really struggle because the money just isn't there. So I can't say that I have a crystal ball, but I imagine that a lot of venues will not survive the year that I think it will take or more before we have any semblance of sort of live and in-person shows related to sort of those artistic musical events. You know, hopefully there are some bigger institutions that can help out. I know that we've been really lucky with support for a lot of the smaller venues. So Great Scott just raised a lot of money to help them reopen when the time comes. Once has also raised some money from donors. Hopefully those donors will think about what the economy would look like without those venues and continue to support them, because this seems like it's going to be a very long haul for arts organizations and venues to not have any money coming in and then be able to reopen in any semblance. So I think it's going to be very difficult and very long reaching for arts organizations and artists.
Thank you. Ellie or Douglas, what about the economic, you know, how do you kind of balance the economic toll and the work that you want to do?
Sorry, I didn't know if you wanted to go first. You know, the economic toll obviously is major, to say the least. But, you know, we still have to balance with what us personally as a restaurant, where we were thankfully in an okay spot, and but there's a lot of people and a lot of businesses that aren't in an okay spot. And, you know, I'm not giving an opinion on necessarily any type of either loan or government assistance or anything, because everyone has to do what they have to do and make their own decisions based on the amount of employees they have, how many of those employees are eligible or not eligible for unemployment, or the percentage of them that are or not, personal guarantees, how much liquor they bring in, if they even serve liquor. I mean, there's a million ways to, you know, I just don't want anybody to have a sort of judgment based off of what individuals have to do or have decisions they have to make in order to see the next month or see the next few weeks. Because a lot of it doesn't really have to do with necessarily the outside appearance. It has to do with the internal mechanisms and the workings and the gears, and our employees are our gears. And they perform better than the owners do half the time because they're always ready to go, and there's a lot that we have on our plate personally. So you know, financially, everyone's in a different boat, but that's, you know, the kind of part of the community is that if another person's in need, someone either raises money. Like we did a pasta drive for all of our, you know, the first after the first week we were off, what was that, late March. Once we were still in this, you know, dizzying time where no one knew what was happening. There was no face mask yet. There was no real precautions yet. We just knew we were closed. We had to do a pasta drive for our employees that could not receive unemployment. And that was scary, even doing it, just knowing what we were putting our work towards and raising money for our employees that couldn't be helped any other way. That is but we still did it, and the community came out, and it just these, you know, week at a time boosts of confidence. So yes, long term, obviously there was a lot of people that were in a really good groove, a really good moment, had really good momentum. I think the Black restaurant whether it be Black Restaurant Challenge, Black History Month had just concluded. There was a lot of momentum going into, some social justice pieces and kind of reckoning that has been, due to happen for a long time. And I don't know if, I'm pretty sure that there was going to be some sort of incident regardless in the next few months, whether or not there was the pandemic. I'm sure something was going to be caught on tape, as it has been for the past several years, several decades, and even we could say several centuries on film, about inequalities and murders and things at the hand of higher law. So it was going to happen either way, and thankfully there are some really great restaurants of color, and I'm glad this is all kind of swirling into hopefully this perfect storm of change, reform, but also we all have to kind of be holding hands at the same time for it to work, right? If Boston does a certain thing for the BPD towards some sort of reform, or the unions, it can't just be local, it has to be national, because it doesn't really help. So it's the same way as far as, it's a similar way as far as the restaurants, like we're all hurting financially. But as long as we're still having these conversations and these talks about what we're doing and what Ellie's doing and what MIDA's doing, even though we're very close to each other, that's going to, hopefully inspire and help that next company or small business. So.
Thanks, Douglas. We're nearly at time, but I wanted to give Ellie and Martha, a minute or two just to wrap up with any final thoughts on these issues and what we've been discussing. Ellie, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, just kind of quickly, I'm thinking about the arts and what lessons can be learned from the restaurant industry. The restaurant industry has had to respond to everything kind of first, and will probably be the last people to experience the effects of this pandemic. And so there's a lot that is innovation that's happening with restaurants that can be considered when we're thinking about this question of like, what happens when we can't do things in person? It's really about thinking about how to bring the experience to people. And I think one place where there's a lot of room is this place where collaboration lives. So I talked a little bit about this arts program called Eschaton a little earlier. I think what they're doing is very unique. And I mean, because what they're doing is so innovative, they are like booked out till the end of July with their dates. So there's a lot of lessons we can learn from each other and a lot we can learn from working with each other. So I definitely want to see more of that in the future. And I think that's how we're going to get there.
Thank you. Martha, a last thought?
Well, I want to just start by saying that I'm thrilled to have served on this panel with these incredible humans, because I've really learned a lot from each of you guys and your comments and thoughts on, what the next steps look like for us. So I want to thank you all for that. It gives me inspiration as to how we proceed with developing our plans for unique experiences for visitors to Boston. I did see a quick comment or question about meetings and conventions in the feed. And that's something that we should all be very concerned with, whether or not large scale meetings can still take place. Hopefully by 21 they can, but until there's a vaccine, that's going to be a real challenge. And as much as we talk a lot about large scale tourism, the fact is that a lot of our assets in the community could not and will not exist if we cannot welcome back citywide conventions sometime soon to Boston. And I think every major city, as I've been talking with them, feels the same way. So, but I think in general, my only other closing comments would be that I think we've learned a lot from this. And I think, what I hope happens is that consumers develop a level of trust with our industry and with, people that are running businesses like Ellie and Douglas and providing great experiences like Edrie is doing, that we're creative and we're resilient, and we're going to do the right thing. And I say this, I've said this on a few webinars, but I know the members of the hospitality industry in Boston fairly well, and I know that they're committed to doing the right thing. And I make this comments on other webinars, but this isn't going to be Lake of the Ozarks territory here. These business owners and managers are going to be thoughtful, and they're going to, they're going to follow the rules, because they know that it's the only way that we're going to get this tourism economy, hospitality economy, arts and cultural economy back up and running without shutting it down again. I feel that in my bones. I talk to people. This is my 6th webinar today, and a lot of them are more interactive with others, asking questions. And I do serve oftentimes as a liaison to those that are making the sort of directives on how reopening will look in various segments. And I know that there's a passion around every person that I've spoken with that's trying to get their business back off the ground, whether it's the Boston Duck Tours or a small wedding venue or a restaurant or the Museum, of Science, whoever it is. Everyone really wants to get this right. And I do think ultimately, to the question of, economic viability, I see weekly sentiment surveys around travel and what people want to do and what they're willing to do right now. And you're never going to tamp down that beast, that pent up demand. I just don't think it's going to happen. I don't think economics, and I don't think a virus is going to permanently damage people's desire to be with other people and to have in-person experiences. I just don't. Maybe for the short term, it'll be a challenge, but I think in the long term, people will do what it takes. They'll prioritize their spending, they'll prioritize their time so that they can get back out and have human experiences again. Maybe I'm projecting myself into this as that person, but I know I'm desperate for that, and I know that most people that I have been communicating with feel the same way. It may take a little time, but I think we'll get back there.
At the end of the day, we are social primates. Thank you to everyone here for joining this panel. Please join me in thanking virtually our panelists here in the order on my Zoom screen: Edrie, Martha Sheridan, Douglas Williams, and Ellie Tiglao. Thank you all for taking time from your days to speak to us and to share your thoughts regarding your industries and your lives right now and how they're being affected. So thank you, and I will return the program to James for concluding remarks.
Thank you, Ari, so much, and thank you for leading this wonderful conversation. To our panelists, I echo Ari's gratitude. Edrie, Martha, Douglas, Ellie, thank you so much for being here. It truly was an honor when each and every one of you agreed to participate in this conversation and bring your perspectives, so I thank you so much. I know that I myself found it incredibly valuable, and I can tell from the feedback we've received as well that our audience did as well. And I can't wait to engage with your art and your events and your food as much as I can, as soon as I possibly can. So thank you all. I want to thank our friends from the Lowell Institute for their continued support and making tonight possible, and ask all of you out there watching to join us at mos.org/Science Matters to show your support for programming like this. Once again, that's mos.org/Science Matters. We hope to see you all again soon. Until then, stay healthy, stay safe, stay well. Thank you all. Good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.